as a pandemic. So it marks a point in time, but for us in communication also really to look forward. Everybody working in communications knows that our area of responsibility has been really at the forefront of the COVID-19 response to the pandemic. And it really redefines crisis communications is considering that tourism has never been as affected as it has been this past year, forced to come to a radical stop and forced also to rethink on how we will come back. And this is really how we go about this session. The chance to rethink and to restart in a better way with the same goal, to provide a clear, consistent, and effective message around tourism and its proven potential really to drive development, to generate opportunities and bring us closer. We have, I think, a top-level group of panelists and people that we want to discuss about this from all corners of the world, although most of them are, today at least, based in London and nearby Oxford. In alphabetical order, and you've seen it in the program, we have Kojo Bentham-Williams. He is the driving force behind Voyage Afrique, one of the very few tourism-focused, travel-dedicated news outlets in Africa. He joins us from Accra, from the capital of Ghana. We have Rajan Datta. He's with the BBC. Many of you know him as one of the visible faces behind BBC Travel. We have Damon Embling. He's the one in Oxford, actually. He's representing Euronews here, who will have a very interesting example to share with us of how they went about tourism and travel in this past 12 months. All the way from Kerala in India, we have Thomas George, communication strategist from Star Communications, also having a look at how we really are to go about this down the line. Marcia Nicolai, also based in London, joins us. She represents here Google Arts and Culture, the Arts and Culture vertical in the huge operation that Google represents and influences all of our lives. And last but not least, Andrew van der Veld from Expedia, also in London. UNWTO, as you know, the World Tourism Organization, we're based in Madrid, in Spain. We're dealing here with 3 different time zones. So Madrid, Central European time, London, UK, 1 hour behind, Kerala, I don't know how many hours ahead of us. And of course, Ghana, I think we're pretty much the same as Madrid. Kicking off, here we are, ITB, the Internationale Tourismusbörse Berlin, happening finally after being cancelled last year. And now we're moving back towards reality, hybridly, talking about tourism and travel, but without really being able to travel. Now, Rajan, in under 2 minutes, and as a radio man, I know you can do it. What's the BBC's travel story when you cannot travel?
Well, that's a very good question. And we've been wrestling with this for about a year now, obviously. When the COVID outbreak first happened, obviously our first concern was dealing with travellers, with consumers and their worries. So we were looking at it very much from a consumer point of view, in terms of refunds, how do you deal with bookings in the future, and that sort of thing. We then went on to perhaps some of the issues that destinations were dealing with, airlines we're dealing with, the cruise industry, people on the ground, people who rely obviously on tourism for their income. All those elements were something that we looked at with people that we talked to before, obviously all through Zoom. We couldn't film and we couldn't rub our noses or their noses in it by some of us being able to travel because there was a flexibility there. But anyway, as we moved on, we then dealt with the whole issue of vaccination, passports, so all the practical things that I think consumers, travellers had to deal with. But ultimately, our goal is to provide inspiration as well. So we found that there is this pent-up demand for people to travel, and that they wanted from us illustrations, examples of where they could be traveling in the future. So that meant, yes, we'd show them some of our favorite trips in the past, managed to show them something that I'd filmed just before the pandemic in Ivrea in Italy, which we had a tremendous reaction to. So basically, people are desperate to travel, and they will take it vicariously through us if necessary. What happens in the future, I think, is really interesting, and I'm sure we're all going to talk about that more. But that was our initial response to the crisis.
So I take away the inspiration as the what I distill out of your reply. There was a curve, actually, of course, how it hit the consumers. We cannot travel. What happens then on the ground, and then how do we respond to it? And interesting to see that curve from communications, which maybe also reflects how really those working within tourism on the ground also had to face it. Now, I don't know if it was inspiration that really moved Euronews to be so bold as to launch their own travel segment in the midst of the pandemic. Now, Damon Emling from Euronews, and we've been collaborating, you've been featuring UNWTO in our stories throughout the year, and we appreciate that very much. But Euronews took really a bold step, and sometime late last October decided to launch Euronews Travel. I mean, how come? What's the rationale behind that decision?
Hi, Marcelo. It's great to be here. I've been at ITB a few times in person, so great to also be at this virtual event. Thanks for inviting me. Well, as Rajan said, it's about inspiration, isn't it? I mean, some people might call us crazy. Some people might say we took a huge risk. Some people might say that we were brave launching the new Euronews Travel vertical. But the reason we launched it during this pandemic at a time when people weren't traveling was because, like Rajan was saying, you know, we realized amongst our audiences that people were increasingly turning to us for information, particularly across our digital channels. You know, about information about the pandemic, you know, the news stories that we're normally reporting on, all of those things that are informative and educational. But at the same time, through our own research and through other research that we were seeing, we saw that people still had this huge appetite for travel and tourism, even though they weren't traveling. They wanted to travel in their minds, they wanted to be inspired, they wanted to dream, and they wanted to look forward. And actually, this is the whole point of this new Euronews Travel vertical that we set up. It's very much positive stories, inspirational stories, looking forward to the post-pandemic future in terms of when we can get back to traveling. So, you know, we launched this back in October on our social media channels so far, and we've been doing all sorts of inspirational human interest stories. You know, these have been video stories, they've been photo galleries, they've been text stories in there as well. And this is all really appealing to people who see the world in a different way. Yes, they want to travel, but they also want these unique experiences. They want to visit unique destinations, but also they don't want to harm the planet. And actually, at the heart of most of our storytelling in Euronews Travel, it is about sustainability, looking after the planet, maybe giving people more choices, more options, more inspiration to go off the beaten track, to have more authentic experiences. All these trends we were already seeing amongst consumer behavior before the pandemic, which I think are now going to fast track as we go forward. Has it been a success so far? Well, Euronews Travel, we think so it has. We've had a lot of audience engagement. I'm going to give you an example. Earlier this week, we ran a story on one of our digital channels about a 22-year-old woman who was said to be the youngest woman in the world to travel to every corner of the globe. One night this week, nearly half of the traffic, the total traffic on the Euronews website had gone on to that story. So that proves, if you were skeptical about people's interest in travel, that actually gives you some real evidence that people are out there, they're dreaming, they want to be inspired. We're launching a full Euronews Travel website at the end of this month, and also a regular weekly newsletter, kind of giving people inspiration and fresh ideas as they look forward to the future. So it's been a really exciting time. We have been far from not doing anything and stopped communicating. In fact, we found this pandemic to be an opportunity, really, in terms of travel and tourism, to kind of create all sorts of new exciting content.
Thank you so much. I'm taking notes here, statistics. It's the second time I hear the word inspiration. The human angle is important, and of course, we're moving towards that tourism really doesn't exist and live with its back turned to reality and to everybody's concerns. And we agree at the World Tourism Organization that this is really the opportunity to reset, to rethink, and restart. But okay, how do those companies, people, experts see the reality, who are really connected to, in this case, to the consumer? Now, Andrew van der Vels, I believe Expedia has undergone a very interesting exercise in really wondering and asking and studying what's happening. Because on the one hand, we might have a media organization like or the BBC guessing, trying to cater for some public interest. Of course, an organization like the World Tourism Organization and the United Nations concerned, of course, with the 2030 agenda, sustainability, that's fine. But you at Expedia, I think you put your finger as a barometer on what's really happening out there. What lessons do we have so far?
Thank you, Marcelo, for the question, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel as well. I certainly wouldn't say that the BBC and Euronews would be guessing. I think they also have some solid data which they're utilizing in terms of their own strategies going forward. So I think we share, in that sense, a common ground in terms of utilizing data to help us. But you're right, we have pushed that button, if you like, in terms of data analysis. Recently, a new word in my vocabulary, and that's petabytes. We have at our disposal 300 petabytes of data. Now, if you just look at the written word globally in every single language since the beginning of the dawn of time, that equates to 50 petabytes of data. So 300 petabytes of data at our disposal is huge, and I'm sure Google probably has a few more than that, and Marcia will probably go on about that a little later on. But that provides us with a huge amount of data, and we, myself, working for media solutions within the Expedia group, are in a privileged position to actually be between the destinations and the product that the consumers are purchasing and looking for, and the consumers themselves. And that interaction, seeing what they're doing, provides us with a huge amount of information. So, and in fact, similar to what Damon was saying about this dreaming, not to reuse the terminology, but we've been doing surveys not just on our own site throughout since April, in fact, last year, to understand a little bit why consumers were on our platforms. But we also take on sort of research to take the sentiment behind those decisions. So we bring those two together to really understand why consumers are making the decisions that they are doing on our platforms. But from that, what we have seen since the beginning is that dreaming never fell away. So we did see people coming in to cancel, to check the status. That diminished over time, obviously, as you can imagine. But the one constant throughout that entire period is that people, and to Rajan's point earlier on as well, is they want to live vicariously through what they can dream about and see and think about. So from that perspective, we've been certainly in that position. Likewise, not to take more than those two minutes, is in that privileged position, we are also able then to see and help with destinations throughout that period. And we have a decade of history of working with a lot of destinations coming out of natural or human disasters to help reinvigorate tourism on the back end of that. So we work very closely and we lean heavily into the data and the sentiment and the insights that we can garner to help the industry grow. And we truly believe that rising tides help raise all boats from that perspective, and I think we all play a role in that. So that's a bit of a summary, if that's the 2 minutes I have for now, but I'm sure we'll touch on other subjects. Rajan, do you want to take it since you?
I will take over. I feel like a doctor in when the patient got sick on an airplane or whatever. But so let me ask Thomas then. I mean, from your perspective, how do you see the media's responsibility in terms of communicating that travel can recover, and how do you see the future in terms of new attitudes to travel?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rajan. I'll just take you through a quick run of what we have done for Kerala Tourism, which is one of our brands that we work with during the pandemic times. So it will show us, it will be an illustration of as to how communication has worked for a brand on ground during this time. So before the 2020 March period, in 2018, Kerala was hit by a big floods, and destination bounced back with a record growth in 2019, powered by planned communications. And that exercise gave us sort of a playbook to handle a crisis. First was to keep the stories and information flowing at all time, never switch off, to continuously micro-target, to keep creating stories for each of them, to campaign big when it's time. This was kind of playbook that we had by the time COVID hit us. And the brand played a warm host by making sure that the tourists who were stranded were returning home happily. What happened is they wrote about it, media amplified it, and travelers like Angela even promised to return, which was a good boost for the trade and the destination all together. By April, everything was closed. All gates were closed for everyone. So we rolled out a campaign called Trip at Home. And it actually covered travel, about reading, about cooking, a lot of games about travel, a lot of things was covered. By August, everything was standstill. And the brand turned its socials into a platform for the biggest festival of the state to be promoted. A lot of live events, feasts, dances, everything happened, which actually showcased the brand or the destination to all its followers in all its splendor. Come December, there was a prompt for restart as the lockdowns eased, and the brand was first off the block, and the campaign was called A Change of Air for everybody who wanted to travel, which actually people picked up the queue of change of air, and occupancy is very slowly climbing now. And if you remember the playbook that I spoke about earlier, micro-targeting is one thing that we are trying to look at. And we stepped into February and we targeted honeymooners, told them love is in the air, so now is the time to travel, that's a must-travel group we are trying to target. And this week we are hitting the micro-targets, which are basically driving holidays, because long haul is still a far, far away kind of a thing. So with this experience, one question that I wanted to table for all of us here was, destinations can have their own playbooks, but for a global bounce back, we think the world needs updated information about travel at their fingertips, updated on a global scale, information about quarantines, tests, vaccine, which are all going to be different for different people, and something that can be accessible to everybody. With Euronews, BBC, UNWTO, Expedia, Google, all of us here, can we imagine one such?
Thank you, Thomas. I'm just one thing I want to pick up on there, which is this whole notion of virtual travel, because obviously there was a lot of talk about online presence. Make sure that you're still there, that you're still in the mind of the potential traveler. Has that worked? I mean, because there's quite a lot of cynicism about that, because it's not the same, is it?
Virtual travel, I don't think has worked, but then what has worked is a lot of new people have started following the brand, which we are seeing from the responses, and they're picking up, okay, maybe this is a place, I'm putting this into my bucket list kind of a thing. So that is happening now. That is what we've, at least with a few brands that we handle, that's what we've seen. So if the brands were alive and kicking and feeding their followers, then definitely that is what is happening now.
What do you say to that, Marcia? Sorry, Thomas. Because Marcia, from your perspective, obviously you are kind of all-encompassing. Your tentacles are everywhere. But when it comes to Google's attitude to keeping the consumer, keeping the person in the street, if you like, informed about travel, where do you see your responsibility?
Sure. So let me actually just start this, in the midst of a pandemic is an interesting year for us, because this is the year Google Arts and Culture turned 10. And we started 10 years ago with 17 museums, and it was a 20% project because we had the feeling that culture is important to anybody, and whether or not you can travel immediately, you need that context, you need access. So we went to 17 museums around the world and we said, let us take an interior street view of your museum and help you digitize some images and bring that online as kind of this immersive experience. And I think, we did, I think Marcelo's keeping track, inspiration will come again, because, travel starts with inspiration. And also a little bit of planning. I mean, we all like to go onto Street View and see where we're going before we even get there. And we found these immersive experiences really engage users. But when we started, we were thinking just of these museums, these places that had very kind of literal paintings, sculptures, etc. But we've actually grown in the past 10 years to having over 2,400 cultural partners from actually 84 countries bring content, not just typical museums, but we recently worked with the tourism board in Vietnam. We've worked with the tourism board in South Africa. In fact, this week, we launched a Music Makers and Machines retrospective, working with many clubs and other things in Berlin to bring these electronic music experiences online, because that's where culture starts, or culture tourism starts. We're trying to connect with culture, we're trying to understand culture. So bringing that inspiration online is important. And what we've done, in addition to just, under one roof, bring a bunch of different partners online, is we've also said, we started with Street View, this immersive experience, but technology has really has gone even further since then. So, what can 3D and AR experiences bring to it? We worked with schools to bring, virtual immersive tours, informative for school children. We've worked with partners like SciArc to capture heritage in 3D and bring that online as well. In fact, for this Music Makers and Machines, you can go online and you can actually play with synthesizers in 3D and AR. And even though we can't go to those clubs in Berlin, we can still, think about those experiences. We can still reminisce. We can still look forward to that time, get that inspiration. And for us in arts and culture, it's important not just that people who are coming to arts and culture experience this, but we also work with other Google properties like Maps, like Search, so people have better information when they want to plan these experiences. They know what's on at museums, what exhibitions. They can have these 3D experiences even in Google Search. And I think for us, that's where it starts, is planning and inspiration. And that's where we really see Google Arts and Culture's ability to help with the tourism sector.
Okay, well, I think the pilot is back of the plane, so I will step aside, and Marcelo, over to you again. Now, is he on mute? I don't know if I can't hear you, Marcelo.
Can't hear
anybody else. I don't know if you're on mute or whatever, but otherwise, in the meantime, while we'll sort you out, let's go to Kojo. Just tell me about your year, Kojo, and from your perspective, the reaction.
I think that if you look at the pandemic, unfortunately, we needed to wait for COVID-19 to bring attention to tourism, and for Africa, and for what we do, we thought that it gave us the opportunity, to be able to bring the core issues, some of the issues that have not been covered for a long time. We looked at sustainable tourism, responsible tourism, domestic tourism. And that was the message. Again, like Damon said, we had a chance to be able to let people listen to us because we have new content, we had new perspective. And for Africa, much more so, people looked at tourism as just entertainment. So we needed to let people understand that, look, tourism is bigger than the entertainment, sun, sea, and sand. And the fact that we need to, drive policy change. And that's what happened. And so we had a platform that we use constantly with data from the UNWTO and other, institutions to tell the story that this is not what, we aim to do. But again, for policymakers, the DMC to understand, one key area is the fact that for us, we also introduced the Tourism News Wrap, and then we did the Voyage Afrique podcast, because at a point in time, you had everybody was stuck to information. One point was okay. The second point, you had information overflow. So what we thought to do was to be able to give people, to filter obviously the truth from the fiction, at the same time to bring the issues right, at the full step of DMCs, of the tourism boards, of the ministers. So that helped that even we've got a lot of traction during the time. So I believe that it gave us a new even direction of how we want to go and what people need to pay attention. Travelers had to be more conscious to understand the real issues. And that was, I think, it was key. So from our side, apart from the fact that you're not traveling and you're not making too much of a business case in terms of what you're doing, what it did for you was to be able to chart a new path, but also to bring the issues. And again, from the media side, one thing that worked for us was that you typically would have a minister or tourism board, CEO, a DMC, who's not going to speak to you on Zoom or on Teams or something. And all of a sudden, you got people being innovative, and that in itself meant that there was a room for either the establishment or people who thought that they couldn't move outside of their classical things they've been doing to be able to do that. So for us, we thought that it was a pandemic, we couldn't travel, it was a shame. But again, there was an avenue that we could tell the message that why people are losing. If you go to the site, if you go to the attraction, the supply chain is battered. But at the same time, you bring optimism. So when we are covering the event, we give visibility to what is being done by tourism board, by ministries, and what they want to do to change how we consume tourism. So briefly, that's what I can say. And I think it was something that we'll be proud to chart a new tourism forward. And people don't see tourism as just going for sun, sea, and sun.
Marcelo, do we hear you now?
Well, you now you hear me, now you see me. I was listening in and out, and as I was trying to say before, this is the best proof that this is a live event, and you and Damon of all people know, and Kojo as well, that be going live has its challenges, also its gratifications. Unfortunately, I missed out a bit on Thomas's presentation. Regarding the look ahead, of course, way forward, but also on Marcia, who of course have been through Google also connecting now and opening up in a more proactive way, if I may say this, Marcia, to tourism. So not just as a passive observer and looking at consumer behavior in this regard, but really also proactively launching your travel insights also in the middle of the pandemic, and Google Arts and Culture themselves getting involved with the World Tourism Organization and partnering down the line. Now, looking ahead, and I would like to go back to Andrew, because something resonated besides from the dimension of the petabytes. But if you see in terms of what you're getting back from consumers, and this maybe is a question to both of you, to Andrew and then to Marcia. Do you see really that the tourism narrative is matching really the tourism narrative as we see it in terms of people caring about the human side of things, sustainability being a concern for everybody now that we're more aware about what we do and the threats and the challenges that we face? Do you see this narrative matching with what really the people on the street are demanding and are expecting from our sector, from tourism itself, genuinely? Do you see that potential, Andrew?
I would say, yes, it comes back in the sentiment analysis that people do very much care about that sustainability. And again, there are variations to this when you look at different places in the world and also different age groups, so the demographics in that. So there are always variances, but in general, yes. But I would say in the short term, where we are today, coming out of COVID, there is this dichotomy where you have destinations who do want to grow. And I've just read an article this morning about Krakow, who want to come out of the situation, pressing a reset button in terms of thinking about tourism of the future in a more sustainable way, in terms of who do they want to come to their cities or their regions or their countries. The dichotomy is that obviously the traveler themselves there's this, as everyone's touched on, is dreaming and now pent up demand, right? Over a third globally, and again, differences by regions, of people who planned to take a holiday last year had to cancel their trips or didn't do anything, not even a domestic break. So you have this huge pent up, and people are looking towards, taking multiple trips in the back end of 2021. So there's this demand that's growing, and it's going to be, the trick is going to be the management of that demand. And you get this dichotomy between destinations that want to have a sustainable regrowth and the industry, which they support, that needs that economic boost back of travelers coming back into their region. So if you look at that term of over-tourism, that was very much a dominant discussion point prior to COVID, that's going to raise its head again. But for the short term, I suspect it's going to have to take a back seat in terms of what travelers want to get out of the fact that they've been locked up for a year and a bit. So the narrative is there, the sentiment is there. I think the action in the short term will be somewhat different to the longer term return of the thinking around sustainability. And I think it's a longer road for us all. And I think the industry in its entirety has a role to play in that, in terms of finding ways of making that more discernible and visible. And I would say tastbaar is a Dutch word, but more physical for the consumers to realize going forward.
Connected to that, Marcia, Nikolai, do you think that Google Arts and Culture, through the focus on the intangibles, right, of really the huge agenda that you literally portray and that you work on, would you see Google Arts and Culture having sort of a buffer role in that reality that Andrew just described? On the one hand, there's a desire, so let's make this more sustainable, lasting, and better for everybody. On the other side, you have very short-term pressure and real-life survival concerns, economically, socially, etc. So we need to reconcile this. So would you see Google just jumping in there and trying to establish that balance that makes everybody happy?
I mean, I wouldn't know that I would use the word buffer, but we've always seen the potential of arts and culture, because no matter what, you can't visit 2,400 museums or institutions in one lifetime. And so having that accessible allows you to kind of understand a little bit more about, different cultures and figure out what you kind of connect with. And I think, a key to travel, especially kind of in post-COVID era, is people want this human connection. They want authenticity. I think that they won't, be satisfied just to go to the same destination as 1,000 other people and, walk through for 3 hours and then get and leave. They're really looking to connect. And by making this kind of information available online, by giving people this understanding, they can, connect and find surprising locations. I mean, in London, domestic tourism is going to open up before international tourism. And there's so much opportunity for places and institutions and tourism boards to really, let people discover what is interesting and unique about your destination and to give them authentic travel experiences. And I think in that sense, that's kind of the power of arts and culture, is it gives kind of every institution a place to kind of bring that inspiration online, and it gives users the ability to look at their interests and try to find a place they really connect with and feel that they can have, an authentic travel experience too.
So almost like the conscience role of let's not forget what this is all about, whilst we're really struggling to survive and look ahead. Thomas George of Star Communications, again, thinking about strategy. We always said the World Tourism Organization, we like to think that tourism is one of the best, probably really communication vehicles at a microeconomic individual level. It's a personal decision to travel or not to travel, where you go. It's a family decision. It's highly sensitive to, a myriad of factors and so on. So do you see that responsibility, that sense of responsibility, also having the potential of being embraced by those who communicate tourism, be them, of course, destinations, but also companies? Or is it just too complicated when we're living in a world where Andrew described there is a pent-up demand? We need to get really things working again in the broader sense. Tourism is a fast trickle-down economic sector, as we know, and then we can bother about the sustainability, concerns later on. Let's get things moving first. I mean, is there a dichotomy also in this regard, or can we seize the power of tourism?
I think we can seize the power of tourism, but at this point in time, as you said, and as Andrew said in the beginning, sustainability is something that people have in their back of their heads. So till now, from a destination point of view or from a tourism point of view, sustainability has been about the destinations. It was a checklist that destinations used to have. Okay, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. So we are a sustainable destination or a sustainable hotel or a resort kind of a thing. So how do we pass on that sustainability bit to the traveler also will be the challenge that we have now. And maybe COVID has given us a right opportunity to bring that into the radars of the traveler, to be more sustainable or practice more sustainable activities or actions, so that the travel in itself becomes more sustainable. We cannot never say we can. On the other spectrum, we have people saying air travel is the biggest polluter, so don't travel at all. So that is always there. But how do we do it by causing less damage to environment, to the places that we visit? So that narrative can be built into the traveler's head as well. But destinations on their own might not be able to do it. Maybe a larger global campaign driven by someone like the UNWTO should be doing it, so that it slowly trickles down into the heads of the traveler. But to begin with, at this point in time, people will be looking for information, which is something that I shared during the presentation, which you missed. People are looking for information. I don't know whether I can travel. If I want to travel to Spain, if I have the desire, as I said, the pent-up demand is there, as Andrew said. But if I want to travel, what should I do? That information is not there in anywhere now. It is very difficult to dig that information out. Even for me, to travel to another city in India, like Bangalore, which I frequently travel to, it is difficult for me I have to check a couple of times, check again and again, to make sure that the information is right. Okay, I need to do a test, and then only I can travel. There is no quarantine. So that information will be the first thing that communications will have to tackle as we go ahead and open the gates in some time now, after vaccinations are rolled out.
Okay, that's another level of communication, of course, because we're not talking about neither reporting about tourism, nor communicating what a destination has to offer, but really the institutional information around new protocols, standards, harmonized ways, etc. So there's still a way to go. That's at least what we're seeing, and from the perspective of the World Tourism Organization, that if something has been proven by this pandemic and by similar challenges also in the past, but probably never so clear, is that flying solo doesn't get us very far because we're so interconnected. This sounds like common sense, but common sense is at times less common than one might wish. What's looking ahead? So in a perfect environment where on the one hand, of course, we come out of the pandemic, on the one hand, on the other, that of course we have those standards and protocols with different realities, different countries really speak to each other, so that we actually can travel, having the right institutional, if you like, and health-wise, etc., security information. What's the tourism story of the future, Kojo? Where do you see the tourism narrative going forward to? Because of course the nostalgia hits, and when do we go back to 2019? Now, is this the right place to go back to? Andrew and others mentioned before the previous challenges of over-tourism, for instance, and now we're in a moment of a new awareness and looking forward to other values. Kojo, again, what's the tourism story of the future? How much will it differ from the ones we were used to until now?
Let me pick on what Thomas said, and clearly that information is very key in terms of destination and institutions putting out exactly what you need to know before you travel, because there's too many, different information. Sometimes you can research, you get to the airport, and one instance after we were allowed to travel, you get there and the information that the airport staff are giving you is different from what you read. So that means that it's difficult for people to even restart tourism. Now, in terms of the story, I think that we are all witnesses to what has happened. And when we were locked down, we realized that people even use the word over-glorified tourism sector, to the point that there were things that we never paid attention. And all of a sudden, we know that the supply chain is that strong to the point that if you're not going to Masai Mara or you are not going to this attraction or this museum, people within that community or within that chain are struggling to survive. And so the story will be that how do we then become conscious, become responsible? But then again, how do we measure tourism and not bring the success of tourism to just macro figures? And so you see that a destination says that it has 3.6 million, all of that. And that particular destination is not able to give us a breakdown. Now, what it has taught us is that the UNWTO launched this live tracker. So if you go on there, you can get some figures and you can probe further to understand. Again, the story will be that what will be the benchmark of success, as opposed to what we know colloquially that destinations will tell us, and we are targeting that. So it is brought out different types of issues, or if you like, things that we knew, except that now it's that we cannot lose sight of it. So the story will be that yes, tourism, and more importantly, now we've seen that like we are having now, hybrid virtual events will be part of us, for some time now. So we need to be able to adapt, and then have the biggest story that resilience is not an event, it's a process. And so if we are beginning to say that tourism is resilient and destination want to put out something there, we should begin the process of educating, telling people what it means to travel on low carbon, whatever that it is. And even to come to the point that we are seeing that this over tourism and mass tourism before the pandemic, really sometimes people took it from different perspectives, because you cannot just say that if people are going to just La Rambla in Barcelona in itself with the huge numbers, can be over tourism. But then if you're managing the process of spreading those figures, then we are not caught up in a situation that everyone is talking about over tourism without able to give those things that help us appreciate that over tourism in itself might not just be a word that we are banding around, but the fact that we understand the issues that we want to put out there. So in a nutshell, what I would say in terms of our story is that tourism, like you put it, is a force for good, but we have to practicalize it. And people have lived through the tough time, the reality, as opposed to what we see on PPT, on document that is written. So you much appreciate that you can wake up today and then everything come to a screeching stop. So my story will be that let's pay more attention to the finer details and the small things, and that we shouldn't just limit ourselves to the success of tourism just at the macro level.
Thank you, Kojo. Now, of course, the likes of Kojo and Rajan have to now rethink and probably reinvent how they cover and go about tourism. Maybe the point of advantage, if you like, for Euronews, Damon, is that not that you were not covering tourism travel before, but officially you launched it in the middle of the pandemic. So you don't have to really reinvent from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic tourism coverage. Where do you see the story? How have you faced this? Because of course you've always, I presume, faced from Euronews as we're dealing with tourism, now we're in this situation, but we will come out of it.
Yeah, indeed, you're right. They're launching a brand new travel vertical during the pandemic. Obviously, we were reinventing what we already did in terms of travel and tourism coverage. We've long been partners and had commercial clients in travel and tourism sectors right around the world making sponsored and branded content. And of course, we've been reporting on travel and tourism in the news when it's also hit the headlines. But I think, our narrative going forward is really very much with sustainability and this word conscious at heart, because we did a white paper, actually, a travel trend report at the end of last year, which I co-authored with a travel trend forecasting agency called Globe Trend. We were looking at the emergence of this conscious traveler. And we were looking at some existing themes that have long been out there for the past few years, things like nomadic tourism, ecotourism, mindfulness tourism, wellness tourism. But then we were sort of honing in on particular trends that were emerging. So if, for example, we take ecotourism as a theme, well, one of the trends that we're expecting, and we anticipated in the report that we published, was the increased prevalence of things like cultivations. So, people not only sort of wanting to kind of go away and make a positive footprint, but they also want to contribute to communities. They actually want to make a difference when they go away. But I think, that's going to be a big part of the narrative in terms of these authentic, immersive experiences, getting away from over-tourism, sustainability. But I think also for the industry, it's far more now than paying lip service to sustainability. Once upon a time, it was like, stay at our hotel, we have water-saving energy systems in place, don't throw your towels out in the wash every day. It's gone far much more than that. And I think in terms of our narrative, that's what our audience is expecting from us. They want to know that actually when they do go away, they really can make that positive difference. And I think, going forward also, I mean, there are different views and different mindsets within our audiences, of course, in terms of what they see as the future of travel. Of course, millennial travelers, you know, it's less about ownership, isn't it? And it's more about having those authentic experiences, whereas older people, they might be a bit more hesitant about traveling over the next year or so, and they may be looking for different kinds of narratives within our stories, more about the sort of reassurance side of things and how safe it's going to be to travel going forward. You know, working with our commercial clients over the past year in travel and tourism, I mean, some were saying to us, should we stop communicating? And we were actually saying, no, you shouldn't stop communicating whatsoever. But instead of kind of making programs that was telling people to travel now, of course, that would be a silly thing to do when we're not traveling around the world right now because of the pandemic. We have also been making programs for destinations where they've been talking about how they've reacted to the pandemic, the measures they put in place, the safety protocols, the reassurance stuff. We also did a series in Spain a few months ago called Here We Grow, and it was about agriculture in Spain. It was about all the lovely food and drink that comes out of the country. It wasn't telling people to travel now, but what it was saying is, let's celebrate the great things that Spain has to offer. So it was keeping Spain out there through a narrative, but it wasn't telling people to travel now. So there's lots of really great stories still to be told and lots of inspiration going forward. Just one final point I wanted to make on this answer is that we've actually just published a poll today in terms of looking at how people are feeling about traveling once the pandemic restrictions are gradually lifted. We found the headline figures there were that most people supported vaccination passports, but interestingly, only around 4 in 10 people were saying that they plan to travel abroad on holiday this year, even though the restrictions are lifted. So that may mean, of course, domestic tourism rebounding first, domestic tourism being obviously an important market right now as well.
Can I just come in there, Marcelo, and just talk a little bit about behaviour, because I'm a bit optimistic about how future travellers will behave, because I think in the lesson of the last year has been how amazingly cooperative everybody has been when it comes to taking safety measures, wearing masks, all that stuff. And I think in the future, the reset thing will happen, because I think people will feel responsible. They'll realise that we are all part of this, and that they will have to behave better when it comes to sustainability. Also, sustainability, as we know, includes diversity in terms of the workforce that we're talking about, in terms of, you know, being just more aware and more conscious of the world around us. So I'm hopeful that I think people will look for new ways of travelling. We won't just go back to the old ways. Inevitably, there are pioneers in this. There are people as the vanguard, but then there always has been, you know, and we go back to smoking. You know, people, only about 3 or 4 years ago, everyone was smoking everywhere. We've all managed to stop doing that on the whole, in public and in public places. So I think this will happen when it comes to what we call conscious travel, because we can't lose this opportunity. This has been a huge reminder. Climate change is a huge issue this year. That's not going to go away. And the traveller is, I think, increasingly conscious of their role in making the world a better place.
Thank you, Rajan. So, I mean, connecting a bit the last contributions by you, from Kojo to Damon to Rajan, you're mentioning conscious, the word authenticity comes up again and again. Of course, it all goes back to inspiration. It's kind of a rediscovery of tourism down the line. And I don't know if Marcia, Nikolai, from the perspective of Google Arts and Culture as a newcomer to tourism, officially at least, with the tourism really headline connected to it, because as we know, oftentimes culture, arts, etc., didn't necessarily identify itself as part of the tourism value chain. Now, I think you make this step. Are you discovering a new world through tourism, that it's much more overly present than one might think, Marcia? What's your take on this? And also, of course, looking to the future.
I mean, I think it's not just about rediscovery, it's about discovery. I think for us, what we really, as I mentioned, we started focusing on tangible tourism, tangible culture, but so much of culture is also intangible. And the ability to bring some of those intangibles online has been very powerful, but ultimately, from my perspective, that's also why people like go to places to understand the food. I mean, I'm a big food tourist myself, so the thought of going, you know, to Nigeria to taste the street food of Lagos or something like that, you know, we can bring those experiences, that intangible culture online, and that allows not just a rediscovery, but a discovery of something new, of somewhere you haven't thought about. And I think that's also important to kind of reinforce the narrative of, you know, we have had maybe a dominant culture narrative about what's interesting to visit, but so many of us have so many different and diverse interests. And to be able to connect to those interests, to use something like Google Arts and Culture to bring all of that together so that people can connect and discover a whole new world or new places or new destinations is really important. And I think for us, that's really, you know, one of the reasons that we feel like the arts and culture platform can kind of add that benefit to tourism.
Now, all that's fine, and nobody would disagree with that. Of course, with the deeper lying values, the future sustainability, changing behavior positively. Now, from a communication standpoint, again, going back and back to Thomas George all the way to India, how do we convey that message? Because as communicators, we always have to ask ourselves, okay, we agree on this. Now, why should others care? How do we make this relevant? Not because it's important to me or to us, 7 people at this event, and to the hopefully many viewers we have, that's fine. But how do we break out and make it relevant really now for the at the macroeconomic level, really for the thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of travelers, for the tourism companies and so on? How do we make them care about this?
As I mentioned before, Marcelo, I think individual destinations can only do so much. As others mentioned now, when gates open, everybody will be trying to get their own pie of the share of the pie. So maybe it's a time when a body like UNWTO, maybe in connection or in partnership with larger global media organizations, including someone like Google, drive out a set of communications which will inform people and educate people about how to travel in a better way than how they were used to traveling before this. Because it could include things from how do I go about booking my ticket. It could include things about how do I fly, or where do I fly, when do I fly, or when I'm at a destination, what do I do, what do I don't do. It could be any of those things. Maybe we have the time now at hand so that we can create a lot of information around it and start pushing them out as communication campaigns. But it has to be done by somebody who's not got a vested interest in the traveler's pocket, from the traveler's pocket, the money from the traveler kind of a thing. So it has to come from some organization or from a group of organizations or a body or a voice from that kind of a place.
Andrew, do you agree with this? Is this the solution? Big campaign, UN agency like UNWTO, big company like Google, the digital world, educating the consumer. Will this do the trick? Talking about media solutions and you having your finger on what consumers are expecting.
Look, I think, let's looking forward into the future. I think Rajan made a very, very clear point, which human behavior adapts based on the frameworks that are put upon us, right? So we all do that willingly or unwillingly. We do adapt because of the necessity that needs for us to need. And I think tourism in the last year, and and we're all consumers, by the way, ourselves, right? We're all travelers as well. I think we all understand the fragility of the tourism infrastructure. We've actually all of us have had holidays and trips and whatever it is been taken away from us for a year, and we understand the fragility of it. So is it something which needs to be communicated? Yes, I agree with Thomas as well, that it's something that should come from a trusted, impartial source and disseminated globally through the various distribution channels. We talk about media, but likewise, Google or Expedia or Book, it should be almost like, if you think about it holistically, almost like a sort of you know, like you say, you buy a pack of chicken, you know, what percentage of fat, or, you know, it should almost come as a health support or an idea that people are aware of it, not something which is stringently enforced, but certainly that they're aware of what that implies. Now, we've obviously taken steps of working with yourselves as well as UNWTO and signing a memorandum of understanding for inclusion and diversity, education, and what have you, but also with UNESCO about single-use plastic. So steps are being taken in that direction. But yes, it does need a consortium that sort of supports that out there, and then getting it out. And the question then is, what distribution channels do you want to use? And again, you know, word of mouth remains as, you know, as a source of inspiration, information, and sharing of data, if you like, in the new world through social media. And we all have social channels, etc. So it's just getting that out there as well, as I think it's will help certainly to get the customers, the travelers, thinking differently about travel into the future. But travel they must, and travel they will.
Yeah. So here I was asking for the secret formula, maybe to have the solution for everybody. So it goes really down again, however sophisticated and Googleized and petabyte dataized we are, it goes down to the human angle, to the individual experience, the good old word of mouth, analog communication and experience. Is it that, Rajan? We have, by the way, 2 minutes left. We all like to talk, so really, I will cut you off in about 15 seconds. Headline.
Yes, well, word of mouth and influencers, even amongst your friends, they are absolutely crucial. Yes, if someone tells me that Kerala is the best place to go right now, I'll be going to Kerala, or I'll be trying to go to Kerala. So all those things do matter, yes. And I'll just return to my point. I'm optimistic. People will change their behavior. Andrew, I think, backed me up on that. And yeah, I think the future looks good.
Well, Rajan, you will go anywhere at the moment. So, but Kerala is definitely a great place to go. Kojo, a headline. Is this the takeaway? We change, we adapt, and we will, again, tourism being really always at the crest of the wave of innovation and the social behavior, business, and so on. Move on. What's your takeaway?
I think that I would simply say that, you know, it's time to travel, but again, travel responsibly, and all will fit into that. If I'm to wrap up, you know, from a headline, yeah. Thomas,
your final headline. What is the takeaway for everybody listening in and watching?
To repeat, I would say putting out information that is easily accessible. That'll be the first step when gates open. That is what is lacking now. We find it clearly. Then probably we can back it up with the responsible travel. How do I become a more responsible traveler as a global communication drive by someone like UNWTO or some other bodies that can be trusted, as Andrew said. That's my help.
Damon, you concur, or
yeah, indeed.
How
I think
do you enrich this with your headline?
I think after the pandemic, this is an excellent opportunity for the travel and tourism sectors to rethink. And in terms of editorial content, for us, it's a chance to innovate as well in terms of our narrative and editorial offering. It's about inspiring people. It's about having people dreaming in their minds of traveling once again, once the pandemic's over. That hunger is there, I think. And our job, certainly in the media, is to help inspire and innovate, and also just again to give people the information and the resources and all the different bits of data that they need to kind of make up their own minds, just representing all those voices and viewpoints across the industries.
Well, hunger is certainly what we see. UNWTO, the World Tourism Organization, says always that we're going to grow back, and we believe it must be, of course, with sustainability as a cross-cutting value, not even being necessary to mention sustainability as such, but really incorporated, and with innovation and broadening the spectrum, with broadened partnerships throughout this year. Google Arts and Culture being one of those new partners who have also embraced tourism proactively and partnering with us. Marcia, I leave the last headline to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Andrew said, travel we must. And the reason we travel is to get that sense of shared humanity. And in fact, I think that actually feeds into sustainability, because in the end, when we travel, when we experience things, we understand the importance of ensuring those things are around, not just for the next few years, but, you know, indefinitely. And I think in a funny way, tourism actually like allows the narrative of sustainability to become more important to people because they understand the importance of preserving this for a longer period of time.
So tourism as also a communications vehicle based on those petabytes that Andrew from Expedia, and thank you all the way to Expedia for participating, mentioned. Of course, not forgetting about the inspiration. Rajan also in London from the BBC reminded us from the very beginning of this talk, the human angle that Damon also underscored. Thank you, Euronews, also for partnering. Kojo, all the way from Accra in Ghana. I know balancing always out as he manages relationships with DMOs, tourism operators, organizations like the World Tourism Organization and tourists themselves. And then Thomas with the easy task of making sense of it all, establishing the narrative and really putting it forward. Thank you very much for this session. Thank you all of those, and especially ITB for hosting this 1 hour plus 3.5 minute discussion. And we look forward to continuing this conversation in different constellations down the line. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.